Ethical Perspectives on the News is Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Hello and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tabak. Our topic today is the future of work in Silicon Valley? To help us explore this issue, I have three colleagues here, Misha Quill, Ross Sowell, and Michelle Mouton, and they've all participated in a study trip to Silicon Valley this summer. So we want to find out, first of all, what led them to join this trip and a little bit about the agenda of the trip and purpose of the trip and so on, and then we'll learn a little bit more about how the example of Silicon Valley might apply to us here in Iowa. So let's begin. Michelle, you're a professor of English. You chose to join a trip to see the center of the technology industry. Tell us a little bit about why you joined this adventure.
Well, sure. This trip was sponsored by the ACM, which is the Accredited Colleges of the Midwest. We're all Cornell professors. And Cornell is a member of the ACM consortium. Mm-hmm. And they sponsored this trip so that faculty members from a number of small liberal arts colleges could study what creates a kind of culture of innovation in Silicon Valley. And so we're studying it as an ecosystem and thinking about what we might bring back to our campuses.
Now, Ross, you're a computer scientist, so your reasons might be obvious here, but somehow you found out about this. Who was the first to organize this on our campus here?
This was all Michelle's fault.
Michelle? Okay.
I had seen the announcement and was obviously interested in going. I'm a computer science professor, and I've been to San Francisco for conferences, but mostly flown into the downtown hotel and stayed there for a few days. But I haven't. I have friends that work at some of these companies, but I haven't actually had not visited the greater Silicon Valley, and so I was excited to go and visit some of these companies for the first time and was delighted to join this group.
And Misha, you are a professor of anthropology, and one of the key members of the team that built the Macintosh was an anthropologist who gave up her anthropology to design that computer for a little while. What interests led you to go on this trip here?
Well, after I heard that Michelle and Ross were interested in going, I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring, because part of my interest as an anthropologist is thinking about culture and organizational culture and what kinds of choices people made in order to make this endeavor, whatever is happening out in Silicon Valley, what makes it so successful, what makes it tick. And I was hoping to spend some time out there and maybe think about ways of connecting our Cornell college students with what's happening out in Silicon Valley.
So I say a little bit about my own interests. I didn't go on this trip, but I have a great interest in the topic. I began my career in the computer industry more than 30 years ago in the Boston area. And at that time, the Boston area was kind of a rival for the Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was a relatively new term in the early 1980s. It's a term coined in the 1970s. Michael Dukakis, our governor, ran for president, and one of his big campaign claims was that we had what we called the Massachusetts Miracle. Route 128 around Boston was America's technology highway, and that region has since been eclipsed by Silicon Valley. So I'm very interested in these dynamics of what makes the difference that one region succeeds and another does not. Before this program, I did a little research, and I collected all the ways the word silicon has been used to apply to other parts of the world. So you may know this. Are you familiar with other Silicon Valley lookalikes?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's the Silicon Bog in Ireland. There's the Silicon Glen in in Scotland. There's the Silicon Roundabout in London. There's the Silicon Plateau in India, and there's the Silicon Prairie, with many Midwestern states taking a claim to that one, and Silicon Alley in New York City. So all of these regions trying to imitate what you people saw in that center of innovation. So maybe another step here, Ross, you can outline the kinds of activities you had on that trip. I mentioned it was a 10-day trip, and that you had a total of 15 professors from these several colleges. What were some of the highlights for you, places you visited, people you met?
Sure. So we went on a variety of visits. We visited large companies. We visited Google. We visited LinkedIn. We visited smaller startups. We visited a small startup called Moxtra. We visited with venture capitalist firm, angel investors. We visited a biotech startup, an incubator for QB3, is a biotech startup. And so just a wide variety of different types of places in Silicon Valley. And we had a wide variety of people. So we had professors, as you said, from 5 colleges, Colorado College, Ripon, St. Olaf.
And their backgrounds. So we have an anthropologist, a computer scientist, and a professor of English, and this group included other kinds of teachers and scholars as well. What were some of the other backgrounds there?
We had faculty members who studied religion and art, business, economics. What else?
Okay.
It's a wide variety.
Yeah, there's a lot of us, all different.
Now, Michelle, you're a student of literature, and there is a kind of literature that has come out of this industry as well, some of which I share with my own students. There are some very lively accounts of life in Silicon Valley. So I'm interested in what your exposure to that culture was before, and then I'm interested from each of you. You probably went with some preconceptions, and which of your prejudices was confirmed and which were refuted, and so on. So before you went, what was your picture of the region, and what changed as a result of this trip?
Well, my picture of the region doesn't come from my literary study, which is focused in 19th century Britain. But my interest in Silicon Valley was really because I've always had an interest in technology. And my graduate studies I did at North Carolina, and I was in Research Triangle Park, which is maybe another competitor in many ways of Silicon Valley. And there was a lot happening there with education and technology at the time. So that's really the side of things that I'm most interested in involving technology. My sense of Silicon Valley just really came from the media. I'd been to San Francisco, but not, of course, with this kind of intense look at technology and innovation and entrepreneurship in the area. So I think there's a lot of things made more sense to me just being there and experiencing the culture instead of hearing just, on the news what this company is doing and that company is doing. And
Now, Ross, you might talk to students who've gone in that direction and taken careers there, or you might have classmates who've taken that road, or perhaps there have been some popular books and movies about the region. What's the source of your impressions before you went?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I have friends that work there, right, that I went to graduate school with. I met some of them while I was there, reconnected with them, which is interesting. I took a route of being a professor at a small liberal arts college in the Midwest, and some of these students that I was in graduate school with went out to Silicon Valley, worked for Google and other companies. It was interesting catching up with them and comparing notes. I don't know if I was surprised by a whole lot, while I was out there. I think, if anything, many of my impressions were confirmed. I didn't realize how bad the traffic was, or how bad the housing crisis was, right?
Right.
And maybe we can talk more about those things, but yeah.
So when you look at this, you're looking, I think, on this trip more than just at the employers, but you were looking at other institutions in the area. So I think you visited a bookstore, you went to a meditation center, and so on. Give us that picture of the larger community that you saw.
Was partly what's interesting, and I think this ties back to your big picture question about is the future of work in Silicon Valley, and part of what I think makes them so successful is that the quality of life is so appealing. Being in Northern California, there is, the weather's terrific, people have much more, I think, a sense of being connected, or at least hoping to be connected to the outdoors. You know, we spent time on the Google campus, and there's bikes everywhere, and you know, the part of the working at Google is that there are these bikes that are just part of the campus, and people can hop on and ride the bike to their next meeting. And so we definitely had a sense that people are drawn to the area because of the kind of lively culture and the great weather. But also, as Ross said, there's also the downsides of traffic and expensive rent and impossible to buy, you know, housing prices.
So I began my career in a gray cubicle, far from any window. My employer did not provide me with free snacks or a ping pong table or dry cleaning. But some of these employers, they provide free transportation for the commuters who come to work each day. They provide free meals. They the dry cleaning I mentioned, the recreational facilities. But there's a trade-off. And one of the terms I've encountered is welfare capitalism. They've kind of got, it's kind of a new company town, and they've got you trapped there. The trade-off is you're expected to give your life fully and to work there around the clock. There were spouses at Electronic Arts that kind of organized and made a protest because their other half was trapped at the company all of the time. What did you think of that? Or did people talk about that when you
Some of the
interviewed
people
them?
we talked to did describe intense work weeks, you know, and work weeks that really require them to go in on the weekends, to when they were on a deadline for a project, that it was all hands on deck all the time. And even to the point where we had one young person tell us that even when his work was done, his supervisor said he had to be there anyway because everyone else was going to be there. And so, you know, I think that for some of the younger people, working those kinds of hours seemed like a reasonable trade-off. But there was certainly a part of me that wanted to kind of grab them and say, wait, before you get too old, go out and enjoy life, have a date, go and, you know, enjoy the beach or something. So I'm not sure if people get really burnt out on that kind of intensity.
So you and I share an interest in film, and I heard an interview this summer with an economist who was hired as an advisor to a film. I forget which one it was. Maybe it was one of these Wall Street films. And his eyes were opened by this because he saw how people make their living in that industry, and it was part of what people now call the gig economy.
Right.
We don't have one employer that carries us through life, that makes long-term promises to us. Rather, we're each responsible for our own skills. And we go off and we do a contract, we fulfill a contract, in this case a film, but in another case a 2 or 3 year stint with a startup company. And then when that's done, then we go off and do something else. And for the highest performers, this might be very attractive and very satisfying. But I wonder if it works for everybody. What did you see there?
I think that's a great question, and it's certainly something that we heard a lot about from just about everyone we interviewed, but in different kinds of ways. So one thing that we heard a lot about, for example, is that it's not really a big deal to leave your job because there's going to be another one. And I think that is part of the gig economy mentality, but at a certain level. So these are mainly engineers who are have these kinds of job opportunities, at least imagine that they do, so that it's not a big deal to quit your job or leave your job because there's always another startup happening that you can join the team for. But we also, of course, encountered people like Uber drivers who are also living a kind of gig economy in the area and who are benefiting from the kind of culture that exists there. But Uber drivers I spoke to didn't sound as excited about the gig economy and weren't really on the same level as these software engineers. So it's a complicated question, but.
Other?
Go
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So there's a popular song on the internet called "Here Comes the Next Bubble" by the Richter scale, and the lyrics tell the story of somebody going to seek fame and fortune in the Silicon Valley. And in the music video, there's a picture of a little shack. It looks like a garden shack where you'd store your lawnmower. And a price comes up, $997,000, you know? And it says, if you want to move there, better, you know, it shows a pile of cash for the software engineer. It says, better hope the same thing happened to your spouse, because the only way you're going to afford this is with too high salaries. And you said you encountered somebody who's made do with that housing in a way that might surprise some members of our audience, right?
Oh, absolutely. So one of my colleagues that I went to graduate school with got a PhD in computer science from Washington University in St. Louis, and has been at Google the same amount of time I've been at Cornell, so 5 years, earning presumably one of these six-figure salaries as a senior developer for Google.
We all earn six-figure salaries if we count the pennies.
There you go. And so, you know, we're comparing notes. I said, well, I bought a house, you know, in Mount Vernon, Iowa. We're talking about that. He's like, I didn't expect that my first house would be a mobile home, right? I live in a trailer in a mobile home park in Mountain View. And I'm sure it's not a cheap trailer, right? Very, very nice double-wide trailer, but that's what, I mean, in order for him to be where he can bicycle into work, that's what you have to do. The alternative is to move out into San Jose or even further out to find, you know, a home that you can afford. But many people are choosing to live right there in Mountain View or and it's expensive. And you have to wonder what is happening to other people that are being forced out. And so
when I look in the mirror, Michelle, in the morning, I still look 17. But when I visit these companies, I feel awfully old. And as well, there's a different mix of population there. In one of my visits to Silicon Valley, I saw a lot of mixing among different demographic groups, but I also heard some disparagement of the very large number of Asian immigrants and so on. So can you comment on that sort of demographic mix you saw and what you made of that there?
Yeah, well, I think I'll start with the age question that you raised. We heard a number of times from people, let's say from our age group generally, how ageism is a big problem in Silicon Valley, that it's much easier to get a job if you're fresh out of college, and that there's a sense that those of us who are older, more experienced, or maybe past the time when we can be truly energetic and innovative and so on. But at biotech companies, this was not the case. In fact, there were jokes made at a couple of different places that we went about how this is not the kind of place where we are going to be playing ping pong at lunchtime and swimming in the evening at the pool, because before we go back to work till midnight, because we have lives, we have families, we have children, we want to come, we get our work done, we do our work, and we go to our families and want to be with our families. And that spoke in a way to the different demographic, because there's a lot more expertise and education levels necessary in many cases for the kind of work that they were doing at the biotech firms.
So one of the experts that we talked to while we were out visiting in San Jose was an anthropologist, Jan Lewick English, who's at the San Jose State, and she started probably about 20 years ago a project called the Digital Cultures Project. She and some of her colleagues have sought to document Silicon Valley and all of the changes that are happening. And one of the things that they've really emphasized in their work is that part of what makes things tick is diversity. That having new ideas and different ideas and lots of smart people from all over the world is one of the benefits of Silicon Valley, but that some companies don't do it as well as others. Now, the folks at San Jose State didn't say this, but what we've heard both from current employees and former employees, is that there are places, perhaps like Google, that do less well at seeking out a really diverse workforce, but for whatever reasons, that seems to work for them as well. So it seems like there are different models for how do you create a workforce that's going to really do what you need it to do.
Okay, my next comments, I'm going to give you a little background here, and,
Yeah.
then you can continue with this theme, or I'm going to suggest another one
Yeah,
as
do.
well. So I read a book by Jim Clark, who was one of the founders of Silicon Graphics and Netscape. He's a big figure in the field. And he wrote about the Indian employees that at his company. And I read that about half of all startups in the Silicon Valley have at least one immigrant among the founders. Now, he heard two of these immigrant engineers needling one another one day. You know, to get into University of India, they have to take an admissions exam, and then there's more competition to get into the best university, and then into the best program in the best university, and then more competition to come to the United States.
Right.
As I told my own students, you don't stand a chance. But you know, 20 years after leaving school, one was saying to the other, you know, I came in number 1,429 on the national exam, and you only came in 1,431. You know, like this. In the start of Silicon Valley is sometimes credited to a Stanford dean named Frederick Terman, who suggested to the university that it encouraged the faculty to go out and take their ideas out of the lab and commercialize them, and that the university invest in an industrial park. That's where it all started in the 1940s. What fewer people might know is that that Frederick Terman's father was Louis Terman, who popularized the Stanford Binet IQ tests. From the start, there was this emphasis on, we are looking for the brightest, we will pay them the most, and it's a narrow set of skills they're looking for. For a long time, as I understand it, this has faded, but many of these employers qualified prospects with brain teasers during the job interview. You had to jump through these hoops and show how quick you were mentally. And so what I'm leading to here, a long introduction, I want to know your take on this. Is the skill set defined too narrowly? Is that industry open to a sufficiently wide range of talents and interests and backgrounds? What'd you see there? I was fascinated as well, Ross, with the Luther College student, alumnus, who said that, you know, he's doing marketing, but still regretting that he didn't study coding when he was back at Luther College. I thought, well, I mean, you've got a company, you've got a job as a marketing director at a big firm. What's to complain about? But so go ahead. The IQ issue, the testing, the emphasis on these technical skills, where there are all these other kinds of skills that might count for good things too.
Sure. Well, I'll make a comment related to those brain teasers, right? I got an email from one of our students that graduated 2 years ago over the summer, and he sent me a screenshot of his laptop that showed he had been Googling. He's a web developer now, and he was working as a web developer, Googling for some software terms like, I don't know, security injection or something like this, and up came a pop-up that said, "You're speaking our language. Would you like a challenge?" Right? And so he said okay, and it brought up a console where it had a programming challenge for him, and asked him to solve that programming challenge, and he solved that one, and it brought up another one, right? And so it's like, you know, if he makes it through, you know, up to level 6 or something, he gets a job interview with Google, right? And so he had sent me a screenshot of one of these problems, and I said, you know, all those times I told you to study for the programming competition, you know, real world application here. But yes, I think, you know, the student from Luther commented that, yeah, one of his biggest regrets from his undergraduate experience was that he didn't learn any coding, and even as in his position as a marketer, I think, you know, he needs to be able to communicate with the people that are developing the product that he's marketing. So.
What do you think, Michelle?
Well, I'm sitting here because I think we were pushing him quite a bit to come up with something that he regretted that he didn't get as an undergraduate. So I don't know how big of a regret that was. But I did hear there was tension, I think, in many of the interviews that we had between people saying how very important the liberal arts were, and how in some cases it was so important to their own development before they started their work, and in other cases people they might hire. But at the same time, we would ask, well, where in your team is the humanities major? Where in your team is the anthropologist? And we didn't get a lot of answers to that in terms of specifics. So,
How do you think you can help your students find a hook that would let them participate in this growing and productive industry?
Well, I think for anthropologists, there is kind of a ready-made niche, because there are a lot of big firms are hiring anthropologists to do user testing, to help develop products. But I think in the other social sciences and the humanities, really focusing on communication skills, experiences, part of teams, are all things that are going to help people be more successful.
We're near the end of our program here, so I want to give you an opportunity to respond to one more major theme, which is Google's motto is "Don't be evil." And many of these companies are claiming it's not all about trying to become a billionaire 6 months from now, but really we're trying to do good in the world. And I want to know how much you heard that message, how persuasive it was to you.
What do you think?
well, I think we heard that message a great deal. And from the top scientist at Stanford who said that scientists' role was to forge new ground, to proceed on the science, and it would all work out. It was all good, and from that to do no evil, to here are all the inventions, the new technologies that are going to solve all the problems that past technologies have created. There was I think that was a theme throughout our time there.
I do think there was an acknowledgement, though, on the part of some senior people that having ethicists or having humanities people could really help them work through the sort of knottier questions about what role technology has in our world.
Especially in biotech, I think those folks were.
Now, your students, Ross, some of them, are going to decide 3 or 4 or 5 years after you graduate them that living the rest of their lives with their wrists chained to a keyboard under fluorescent lights doesn't appeal very much. And they're going to want to branch out. What do we have to do to help them thrive in this industry? They might have a good start with their technical skills, but need something more. Do you think about that in your teaching?
Do I think about wanting them to have skills outside of the technical?
And how they might branch out. This the skills you give them a hook. It gets them in the door.
Well,
and then what?
I mean, I think I talk to prospective students and their families a lot at Cornell, and one of the things that comes up is, why should I study computer science at a liberal arts college, right? And the pitch that I make to them is that one of the reasons to do that is for these other skills that these companies that we visit say that communication skills matter, right? That being able to work on a team matters, and being able to talk to people that aren't just other engineers but are people in the marketing department or somewhere else matters. And that's something I think we do a really good job of, and that I encourage students in.
Okay, very good. Thank you all. And this is the end of our discussion. These 3 professors are going back to their classrooms to take what they learned to make their students as innovative and creative and inventive as the best that they saw in the Silicon Valley. Thank you all for joining us.